Hi, my name is Katie Kilroy-Marac, and I'm an associate professor of anthropology here at the University of Toronto. I do my undergraduate teaching out at UTSC and my graduate teaching downtown at the St. George campus. I was lucky enough to hold a 6-month JHI faculty research fellowship during the winter term of 2020. And I've made this video to tell you a little bit about my research and how the fellowship has allowed me to advance my work. So the project for which I was awarded the Jackman Fellowship was titled The Passage to Marseille, Colonial Subjects and the Psychiatric Imagination in a Southern French Asylum. This is an archive-based project that has its roots in my first book, which was published in 2019 and which is titled An Impossible Inheritance, Post-Colonial Psychiatry and the Work of Memory in a West African Clinic. The story that motivates my current research is this. Between 1897 and 1914, the French colonial government transferred more than 140 West African mental patients from Senegal to Marseille to be institutionalized within a large public asylum called l'Asile de St-Pierre. Though justified in humanitarian terms, this colonial experiment was an abysmal failure on all counts, an act of colonial violence framed as care. Few of the men or women who were sent to Marseille were ever repatriated, and most died within 2 years of their arrival within the asylum. So it was actually while I was doing archival research for my book years ago in the Senegalese National Archives in Dakar that I first came upon mention of the treaty ordering the transfer of patients. Since that time, I've found references to the treaty in a handful of articles and papers, but the consequences of the treaty and the lives and experiences of the patients subjected to it have never been the center of any sustained research or study. Because of this, then, a couple of years ago, I made a trip back to Dakar to in earnest begin archival research related to this project. While there, I began to uncover treaty negotiations, shipping manifests that contained patient lists, a few medical certificates, and doctors' recommendations, and other such documents. Not too long after that, I had the opportunity to do some archival work in Marseille, at the departmental archives of Bouches-du-Rhône, the municipal archives of Marseille, and the archives of Marseille's Chamber of Commerce, also the colonial archives in Aix-en-Provence. There I found hospital intake records, patient files, death records, conference proceedings, shipping information, and correspondences of a few doctors and colonial officials. At that time, I also began putting together a database that included patients' names, origins, diagnoses, information related to their internment, and information regarding the death or, quite rarely, the repatriation of each patient. So switching gears a little bit, Akil Mbembe, in his article, The Power of the Archive and Its Limits, likened the archive to a temple and a cemetery. Christina Sharp has called the archive a, quote, tomb for the fragments of lives enshrined within. Now, the lives of patients in these documents appear as only the smallest of fragments, compared, for example, to the lives of even the ships that carried them to Marseille, but that's another story. And it's made me think long and hard about how to engage with and do justice to this material. During the same time that I was doing archival research in Marseille, I was also a resident fellow at the Camargo Foundation in Cassis, France. We were 10 fellows in total, and most of my colleagues there were artists and musicians. While I was there, I had the space to begin thinking seriously about other ways, beyond the more conventional forms of academic writing, that I might present this work and make it accessible to larger audiences, especially audiences in Dakar and Marseille. In particular, it was working closely with 2 archive-based artists at Camargo and encountering this radically different way of engaging the archive that opened for me the possibility of presenting my work in such a format. And excitingly, as I'll talk about in just a second, the Jackman Fellowship allowed me to begin putting the pieces in place for exactly this. So, formative to my thinking as I'm imagining new ways to engage the archive has been the brilliant work of Black feminist scholars, in particular scholars such as Marlene Orbise-Phillip, so Telling Stories That Cannot Be Told, the work of Saidiya Hartman, So, for example, her use of critical fabulation and her reflection on how one might approach what she calls the quote unquote fact situations in the archives, and the work of Christina Sharp, and in particular her ideas surrounding the orthography of the wake. Thinking about the Colonial Archive as, quote, a site through which colonial power attempted to gain control over the future of human relations and knowledge production, the question of how we might intervene to decolonize the archive and what this could or should or might look like is a critical one. Gina Kim, in her excellent recent book, Post-Colonial Grief, reminds us that, quote, decolonization efforts have had to turn to the perpetrator's archive, what Roseanne Kennedy calls the perverse archives, in order to support the reconstitution and rehumanization of the colonized. In my larger project, I'm interested in thinking through the kinds of transformative politics that might emerge from our ethical engagement with these and other archives, as well as the various forms of engagement that we might embark upon. So my 6-month fellowship started in January 2020. I spent the first month gathering the materials I had collected in Marseille and Dakar, and also spending much of my time working on the database that I had started earlier of patients, origins, internment information, and so on. On February 1st, I flew with my family in tow to Marseille. And in Marseille, I had 3 main goals. The first was to conduct additional archival research in the departmental archives. The second was to establish a collaboration with a French scholar of colonial history at Aix-Marseille University, who I had only met online. And hopefully, the next step of that collaboration would be to plot an article that we would co-author together. The third goal that I had for my time in Marseille was to establish an international team of scholars and artists who could come together to creatively engage with the archival traces of this devastating yet virtually unknown piece of French colonial history. Now, I think it's safe to say that 2020 didn't end up working out like any of us had expected. My plan had been to stay in Marseille until April, but due to the pandemic and due to the fact that France locked down quite quickly, our return tickets were canceled, and because we had secured housing in Marseille, we decided to go into lockdown there and ended up staying in Marseille until June, albeit under lockdown for most of that time. I was, during this time, nevertheless able to achieve some of my goals and even find a few new opportunities for writing and collaboration during lockdown. So during the month of February, I was able to return to the archives. They weren't formally closed until the beginning of March, so I was able to get about a month of archival research in, and I found very valuable information there that I was able to tie directly into my database, and that will, I think, be crucial to the next steps of the creative project. I also established the collaboration with the French scholar of colonial history, and we indeed were able to brainstorm and plan a co-authored article, which we are only just now getting back to, but which we hope to have ready for submission by the spring. Finally, and perhaps most excitingly, I was able to gather virtually, an international team of artists and scholars. It's a team of 4 of us. It includes Dakar-based artist Kine Ao, Berlin-based scholar and curator Zairong Xiang, Chicago-based artist and scholar Hong Go, and myself. And we gathered together virtually to begin laying the groundwork that will allow us to imagine and assemble an archive-based art installation for exhibition in Marseille, and then hopefully later in Dakar, Montreal, and Toronto. So as a group, virtually, we have come to position our project as a critical study of and creative response to the collection of colonial documents that I have gathered up until now, and also a critical response to and kind of creative response to archival power more generally. We situate ourselves within an archival turn in history and the social sciences that reads both against and along the archival grain. And our collaboration engages with these archives in ways that are deeply informed by and are indebted to Black feminist scholarship, epistemologies, and radical methodologies, particularly those which creatively engage with what archives do not or cannot say. Here we recall, for example, Michel Rouve-Trouillot's intimation that, quote, "the production of traces is always also the creation of silences," end quote. And we center our creative work on what Marisa Fuentes has referred to as the ephemeral archival presences and fleeting glimpses of silenced and subjugated lives barely visible in our records. So the core themes of our work will interrogate and bind together past and present, history and the contemporary world. We will address and provide critical commentary on such topics as the historical colonial origins of present-day inequality and racism in Marseille. Also, we will provide critical commentary on questions of immigration and the trauma of migration, forced or voluntary. We will take up themes of gender-based violence and discrimination. And finally, we will focus on the ways in which policing, surveillance, and incarceration tend to weaponize psychiatry, past and present. The four of us were able to work on and submit an application for an artist residency program, and I will also be applying for a Shirk Insight Research Creation Grant in this next cycle with the other team members acting as collaborators. So that is very, very exciting for me and for this project as well. A couple of other opportunities arose for me during the fellowship period as well. These are smaller things, but I also wanted to share these with you. So if I go back to my slides here, in April, I was able to publish a short piece in the online forum Africa is a Country, titled A Letter Unanswered, which focused upon a letter sent by Frantz Fanon to Léopold Senghor. Léopold Senghor was Senegal's first president, but it was before he was president. So the letter was sent in 1953 asking Senghor for a job. So Frantz Fanon asked Senghor for a job in this letter. The two already had a somewhat strained relationship by this time, and there's no record of Senghor ever responding to Fanon's letter. In this piece, though, I wonder upon the letter, and I ask what might have been if indeed Fanon had taken up a position at the Psychiatric clinic in Dakar rather than at Bly de Joinville in Algeria. In May, I also published another short piece, this one in a Camargo Foundation series called Carnet de Camargo, about my lockdown experience in Marseille. The title of this piece was The Fleeting Intimacy of Neighbors, and it's centered upon my experiences at my window in a city that was familiar to me, but not terribly familiar to me during many weeks of lockdown and not knowing what was going to come of all of it. And the kind of relationships that I made with people in their windows across the street from me who I had never met in person and never did meet in person. So in closing, I want to express my sincere gratitude for this fellowship. It allowed me the time and the space I needed to take the critical next steps of this project that has at times felt too big, too unwieldy, too new, too different from my other modes of academic production, even too ambitious. I certainly would not have been able to establish and nurture these collaborations were it not for the JHI, and I am grateful and will always be so grateful for the time and the space.